Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. I think he is a rising star in the podcast space. He has the very popular now QTR podcast, or Quote the Raven. Christopher Irons, thank you for joining me again.
You're welcome. What's going on? How are you? It's awesome to be back.
Yeah, man. I've been listening to almost all of your interviews. I think I missed maybe one or two in the last 6 months since I interviewed you. You've been really crushing it with the quality of the guests and your rants. I think it's great. You're bringing a real freshness to the online community where people actually talk about the financial markets, because a lot of it's just very dry.
Well, you know what? It wouldn't be doing as well if there wasn't a need for it. You know, people wouldn't be tuning in and listening to these interviews if they felt like they were getting this content elsewhere. And part of the reason that I'm doing it is because the financial media is, again, has this ridiculous inherent long bias and is so dry. And I think everybody is starting to call them on their bullshit a little bit, and those people that find themselves kind of on the outskirts of not wanting to accept what the mainstream media tells them blindly are the people that have a propensity to tune into what I'm saying. And, that's part of the reason that I was motivated to start the podcast to begin with.
Yeah, I completely agree. Some of the guests that you've had on, whether it's Bill Fleckenstein or Peter Schiff and others, and I know people myself in my contact list, and they used to be on financial television all the time. I've interviewed people from the Barron's Roundtable like Fred Hickey and Dr. Mark Faber, and they're just not allowed back on financial TV because they have more of a balance. So they're labeled perma-bears, but that's not really the case. They have more of a balance of, sometimes they're long, sometimes they're short. And anyway, most people aren't aware of how nuts it is just to get on an interview for the mainstream financial media now. In a lot of cases, you're waiting 5 hours at a television studio to get on TV for at most maybe 5 minutes.
Well, and it's just insane. Like right now with the internet, which was not a big of a factor as, it is now maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago. What you're seeing now, especially with things like Netflix and streaming content, is people being able to kind of pick and choose the content that they like. And the everyday person, like myself, like you, is able to go out and start a podcast. And it's a very Darwinistic kind of system where if our content is good and it resonates with people and it's things that people want to hear, people are going to flock to it, regardless of what network we're on, what station we're on. Years ago, that was a big deal. If you didn't have, the contract CBS or NBC or whatever, nobody would take you seriously, and there was really no way for people to access content. Now, the playing field has shifted so much, with the internet and with podcasts and with select streaming, that it's a much more level playing field for guys like you and me that want to go out there and put our content out there. And hey, let the viewer decide. When I started my podcast, I didn't go out and say, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to bring in a bunch of people. I said, let me test the water. Let me see if what I have to say resonates with some other people, because there's a lot of shit that pisses me off about the indie that I feel like I want an outlet to talk about. So what I'm going to do is go barf up my feelings into a microphone 1 or 2 days a week. And if people want to join me, that's fine. And if they don't, that's fine. If people want to listen, that's fine. And if they don't, that's fine also, too. Look, as a libertarian, I'm sure I want people to live and let live, just do whatever makes them happy. If it means tuning into you or tuning into me, that's fine. If it means, whatever it means, whatever you got to do to get your rocks off, I support it. It just so happens that in adopting that attitude and starting the podcast, it's almost been a year now, it has gotten a lot of traction. And people with real gravitas in the industry have started to come on the podcast because they know they're not going to get dicked around like they get dicked around on the mainstream media, and they know I will give them time to make their point, and that I will approach them honest, and that the discourse will be civilized and it'll be laid back, and it's not going to be accusatory or sensationalist. So I think to some degree I owe a debt of gratitude to guys like Carson Block and guys like Peter Schiff, who are well-established names in the industry and people that I have idolized, tried to follow in the footsteps of, for coming onto my podcast, and guys like you that have invited me to come on their show as well. It's a really unique position of growing power that independent content creators have. And right now, all I'm focused on is trying to spread myself across multiple social media platforms, because I'm worried that the day is going to come where I say the thing that pisses off the content censor at one of these social media sites, and they decide to shut me down without cause or reason or rhyme. Ridiculous. So right now, I'm working on kind of diversifying myself across content platforms. But look, you have 20,000 subscribers on your YouTube page because people people like what you have to say, man. And I've seen some good success for the same reasons. I'm surprised at how well I've, to be honest.
Yeah, plus on the mainstream financial media interviews, like, we don't have to sit there and put on a suit and tie and sit in the makeup chair. So I'm not really looking forward to that if I ever have to.
Well, that's not my shit anyway. You know what I mean? Like, if the difference between going on CNBC is to wear a suit and tie or to wear the jeans and a T-shirt that I'm normally wearing, the answer isn't, yes, let me get a suit and tie. The answer is, no, I'm not going on the air. And that's one of the nice things about my podcast is, even in my research, too, and what I write, whether it's on Twitter or whether I'm writing a research report on a company, I committed a long time ago to being myself, saying what I feel, sticking to what I say, explaining to people what I understand, what I think I understand, and also, very importantly, what I don't understand. I'm not a great forensic accountant. There's, different ideologies and theories and philosophies that I don't understand. So let's learn about them together. Let's dive in together, talk about it together. But I'm not claiming to be the all-knowing source of anything. Just a fucking guy trying to figure it out, man, and drink some beers along the way.
So I want to get your perspective on this. I'm going to ask you a very difficult question that I'm not sure anyone actually has the answer to. So where will there be more So where will there be more drama in the next few years? Elon Musk and Tesla Motors or President Trump's White House?
That's a really good question. I think there's going to be drama. I mean, I think the ongoing political drama has just never stopped, and I think that will remain at a fever pitch regardless of who's in office. When there's a Democrat in the office, the Republicans will ramp up their rhetoric, and when we have a Republican in office, the Democrats certainly ramp up their rhetoric. So I think by virtue of the fact that we've already kind of been accustomed to there being so much bullshit and nonsense in the mainstream media about politics, that we're all kind of used to that being at a fever pitch. So my answer would be, I think Tesla is going to be the more prominently felt shit show out of the two shit shows over the next couple of years, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are not in tune with reality as to how this company is valued or exactly what this CEO has done and what his track record is, and the widening delta of who he presents himself to be versus who I believe he actually is. So I think just from a shock factor, I think nobody's going to be shocked when the mainstream media is, covering pornographic amounts of political nonsense regardless of what side it is. But I think people will be shocked when they wake up one morning and Tesla has a problem that can't be fixed or the stock has gotten smacked. And, I could be wrong, but I think that's going to happen.
So I think we have the first reality television president, and he's kind of, the master of reality television. But, it seems now that the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives that there's just going to be subpoenas. It's going to be, worse than McCarthyism was back in the day. And, with Tesla, all the stories that are coming out with Tesla, I listened to your interviews with Montana Skeptic, Mark B. Spiegel, who I've also interviewed in the past, and just so many details that are oriented, whether it's on Twitter, on the Tesla Q, the handle there. It's all these details that are coming out with Tesla. It just seems that because of the stock market right now and how manipulated it is, no one really cares about the fundamentals.
Yeah, I agree. That's my response. My response is I think you're right.
Well, we have Elon Musk's mom, right? The latest stuff, we could talk about some of these news stories. So Elon Musk's mom now, who I don't know what business savvy she has, but obviously she doesn't want her son to lose the company, and she's defending her son. She's coming out and saying, the short sellers are evil, and it's just kind of ridiculous. But
I don't think people understand how the capital markets work. I mean, I've said this on my podcast before. I think this is more than just trying to lop blame on short sellers. I genuinely don't think that, to some degree, that Elon Musk and his compatriots and his mom and certainly his bimbo of a brother, Kimball, I don't think they understand how the capital markets work. I don't think that they fully understand why people believe the company to be as extravagantly overvalued as many people believe it is. I don't. I think they're kind of in some respects like the president, who he knows when stocks go up, he thinks that's scorecard for him, and he says, ooh, stock's up, good, stock's down, bad. And I think to some degree they're doing the same thing. They think that the price should be in a perpetual state of ascension regardless of the underlying fundamentals. That's what it appears to be. Otherwise, what's all this blame on short sellers and blame on the media and blame on bears? I mean, the stock's at fucking $300 a share, right? It was at 17 like 5 years ago or 6 years ago. So you guys have done very well. Instead of being thankful for the insane valuation that the market has afforded this company and perhaps trying to use it to your advantage, which Musk has personally by loaning out some of his shares. But instead of just doing that and trying to capture the kind of delta there in terms of how far the valuation has gotten away from reality, they're still choosing to complain about short sellers, and they're complaining about the SEC, and they're complaining about the media. It's like, just let them do their job and you do your job. And I always talk about Reed Hastings from Netflix, who faced a similar set of circumstances, had a company that was argued at the time to be extremely overvalued, and I think Whitney Tilson came out and made some public declaration that he was short the stock, and what Reed Hastings said was, short sellers are a valuable part of the market, and I wish Whitney luck, and we're just going to focus on executing. And that's exactly what Elon Musk and Kimball Musk and May Musk and the whole Musk family, including the Musk cats and the Musk dog, should be focused on. They should be focused on executing their business model and not bitching and moaning and complaining and turning the narrative short sellers, because they'll realize, like many companies do when they turn around and they make it a question of, whether the short sellers are the boogeyman or not, that it's just a waste of their time, it's a waste of their capital, it's a waste of their brain power, it's a waste of their resources, and all it's going to do is make them more paranoid, more schizophrenic, more unable to focus on what they should focus on. But just going back to my original point, I truly don't believe that May Musk understands the magnitude of the company's valuation, because if she did, as to how the company is, let's say, valued versus, automotive competitors, because if she did, she wouldn't be out there bitching and moaning. She would be telling Kimball and everybody else in the family that has stock to either borrow against it or sell it.
And I think she also put a lot of pressure on Elon to use shareholder capital to bail out Elon's cousins for the Solar City stuff. So I think, obviously my whole stance on that, my opinion is it wasn't necessarily illegal what Elon did using Tesla shareholder capital to bail out his cousins with Solar City. It was just very unethical because the way it was sold on the merger, and none of that stuff has basically come true. That was wrong.
Well, we're going to find out all of that too. Once discovery from, I think, some of these lawsuits are completed, we'll see how it was pitched to the board, how the board came about, whatever. And look, Solar City is, from the best of my understanding, far more defunct now than it was when they made the acquisition. I mean, I believe they've wound down a lot of what Solar City was doing. Certainly I know people that used to work for Solar City that have been laid off. And so not people very close to me, but acquaintances of acquaintances that I've heard have been laid off. And it just doesn't look like Solar City is in focus at all. So if this company winds up going ass up, and at some point, whether it's a bankruptcy judge or a regulator or Elon himself have to look back on the ruin that it has become, to borrow Edward Rooney, student from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if at some point they have to look back on the ruin that the company has become, there will be an asterisk, a footnote by the Solar City acquisition, because it was a horrible misallocation of shareholder capital, in my opinion. And I think we'll look back on it and we'll say, wow, how the fuck did we not know when this happened? And then, of course, I'll encourage people to go back and watch what the mainstream media said about it, because I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure it was something like, whoa, it's great, we're going to create the world's first fully integrated solar and, alternative energy company, and probably just weren't asking enough critical questions about it. But we'll see. That'll be a history lesson and a Harvard Business School case study. Maybe they'll quote me and you right now in it.
And I don't think that Elon really gets a ton of negative press coverage. Now, the 420 secured tweet did hurt him, and he has picked fights with a few journalists like Lynette Lopez. But overall, I mean, almost all of his press coverage in the mainstream financial media and mainstream media is positive. Like, look at the positive coverage that he got with the boring tunnel.
Well, I don't think he got positive coverage from that, so I would disagree with you there. I think that was a farce of an unveiling that was somewhere between, children's bumper bowling and the bumper cards that you ride at the fair. I think he got kind of lambasted for that, rightfully so. What I will say is that when this company started, and certainly probably I would say in the 5 years leading up to maybe 2017, he was heralded as a god. Books were written about him. The media coverage was obsessively positive of him, and it is what elevated him to celebrity status and not just another nerd running a business. And I think that did him a lot more harm than good, because I think his insane wealth and his lift to being a celebrity have perhaps clouded his mind when it comes to business acumen, fiduciary responsibilities, and the role that needs to be played as a public company CEO. He needs to remember that, his job is not to be an A-list celebrity. His job is to be a steward for his shareholders' capital, and the board's job to make sure to also be a fiduciary for shareholders' capital, and not to be his guy that, they go out for drinks with and make Dungeons and Dragons jokes with, or whatever the board of directors directors doing. So the corporate governance of that company is completely fucked, if you ask me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, he just has a bunch of yes men on there. He admitted in the recent public interview that the chairman of the board that was hired, he still controls. So, and the SEC is part of the settlement, right? They said they wanted more of an independent chairman of the board, so he would have to answer to them.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's insane, right? So as part of his settlement for coming out and claiming that he had a buyout lined up for the company when he didn't, which, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the most egregious forms of fraud that you can perpetrate on a public company, as part of his settlement, he had to agree to appoint 2 independent board members and a new board chair. And what does he do? He appoints Robin Denholm board chair and then immediately comes out in a 60 Minutes interview and says, not only I don't respect the SEC, but something to the effect of, she's not going to watch over me. I have control. That's that. So he's just spitting in the regulator's face. That's a game of Russian roulette I would not want to be playing if I was a public company CEO.
So we could talk about Tesla for a long time. Like, they put out another weird PR that they can actually afford to pay the $920 million convertible bond payment, which is weird because if they just had the cash, why put out the PR release unless they're trying to hurt the short sellers again? A lot of the stuff.
Well, or they're kind of understanding that it's a point of contention and that may be what's kind of weighing on the share price lately, right?
Yeah, there's just a bunch of really screwy stuff that they do. I think a lot of it's to try to fry the shorts, and the 420 per share tweet, someone who has experience with the capital markets like you and me and other people listening to podcasts would know that. He just wants to, it seems his mentality from the interviews he does, Chris, is he's like hell-bent on just getting the short, that he's willing to break laws or do whatever it takes to get the short now. It's kind of that.
I don't even know. I just think I would just step back from that and just say again that I think it's more of I think he has a delusional understanding of what it means to be a public company. I don't think he gets it. If he gets it and this is how he's acting, that's even worse. But I'm trying to give him some credit. I think that he exists in this world where he's probably surrounded by people that constantly tell him yes, and he's heralded as a savior, and people applaud when he walks in the room at the Fremont factory, even if they're on the tail end of a 16-hour shift and they have to shit on the floor, like was reported in Business Insider last year. I think when you get so much of that, plus the celebrity, plus the riches to kind of do whatever you want, I think you start to kind of construct your own reality. And I think his reality and the reality of the cold, hard facts surrounding the company that something like, I don't know, an SEC lawyer would look at probably differ substantially. And I'm just not sure he gets it. And I'm not sure that there's also not some mental health issues at play. I mean, look, obviously I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't know. I can't help but get the feeling that deep down he may have some mental health issues that he needs to address, that's a serious deal. I mean, everybody in their life has had people affected by mental health issues in one way or another. To me, I don't know. I see a lot of red flags and a lot of warning signs, and if that's the case, I hope that he gets help for that. But it just doesn't, the whole thing, Jason, doesn't come off as normal to me.
I agree. And in the last 2 years, he actually put on his Twitter he's been diagnosed as being bipolar.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't even see that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, he admitted he was bipolar. I think this was about 2 years ago. Maybe he deleted the tweet, but it was up there for a while. And there was a lot of people commenting underneath the tweet that figures. So let's transition away from Tesla Motors now. I know you're talking about the mainstream financial media. A lot of people, you just did a rant on your latest QTR podcast about Jim Cramer. So this week we had two kind of diametrically opposite things. We had tweets from two blue checkmarked hedge fund managers that I would describe as mainstream with a lot of investing and trading experience, and that's Marc Cohodes and Todd Harrison. They both talked about blatant stock market manipulation in the last month to 6 weeks, where we had, the emergency Steve Mnuchin meeting, and then Jim Cramer said the exact opposite, how because the stock market had a, mini flash crash or whatever on December 26th. So what's your view then on what the hedge fund manager said about blatant stock market manipulation? Marc Cohodes he even tweeted at the SEC and said the plunge protection team, the president is involved, and what Jim Cramer is saying.
What What did the other hedge fund manager say? Not yet.
I'll read the tweet. I will read the tweets for you right now. Todd Harrison, if you're familiar with him, he created Minionville. I'll pull it up really quick. Okay, so his tweet said he's been trading for 30 years. He's seen a lot of different stuff, and he said basically that it's a devolution of capitalism, that he doesn't think that the people manipulating the stock market care about 5% moves up or down, but that this is more of a policy decision to...
Right.
Okay, I'm reading it. Okay, been trading 30 years. I have it up now. Seen my fair share. The blatant attempts at manipulating the stock market are beyond the pale. Not about long, short, or the next 5%. It's about the devolution of capitalism and desperation of leadership.
Right. Yeah, well, look, I think that runs alongside a lot of things that I've said. I mean, we have and I said this just on my most recent podcast, which is, the Fed's job, like, let's just say we buy the Keynesian bullshit, right? Let's just assume that for a second we buy it, right? Even then, the Fed's job is to what? Like, kind of create a soft landing for recession and to kind of make sure things don't get super out of hand during euphoric times and booms. Even that fallacy has devolved into basically watching the stock market on a daily basis and doing whatever's necessary to comfort the market at the slightest 1 second of the market not being comfortable with something, or of people not being comfortable with something, to come in and whether it's put on stop to rate hikes or it's roll out Larry Kudlow on television or to, whatever needs to be done. We are everybody. It's like the market has everybody whipped. Like it's got the Fed whipped. It's got the government whipped. Everybody pays attention to the market. And when the market goes down, everybody starts to panic. And that's what you saw. And by the way, it wouldn't be that bad. We wouldn't be panicking as bad, or we wouldn't be so askew and so many, sigma deviations away from normal if we hadn't allowed this to happen and we hadn't allowed the mainstream media to perpetuate the narrative that up good, down bad all the time. And there wasn't this long bias inherent, but there has been. And that has conditioned people to expect the market to continue to go up. Warren Buffett, the Dow will go to 1 million. Like Jeremy Siegel, just buy stocks. Close your eyes, hold your sack, and buy everything you can buy. You know what I mean? Like, because that narrative has been allowed to be perpetuated, now when we do have what is probably a very healthy and very normal pullback in the stock market after ass has caught fire over the last 10 years and it's tripled, you get something stupid like dumbass Steve Mnuchin goes out and puts out this press release the day before Christmas Eve saying, I talked to the banks and there's no liquidity crisis. It's like, dude, nobody was talking about a fucking liquidity crisis until you brought it up. So now we're starting to see on a much bigger scale how much this micromanaging of the economy and micromanaging of the stock market is going to have a negative impact, lest we forget the giant Keynesian fiat bubble that we are still blowing up in the background, that at some point we're going to have to pay the tab on. I don't know when, 10 years, 100 years, in my lifetime, not in my lifetime, doesn't matter. But we have conditioned investors to basically be pussies. We have conditioned people to think that the market will always go up. We have conditioned the mainstream media to make the assumption that, the stock market should always rise, no questions asked. People don't even look at valuations. They don't even look at the fundamentals. And this goes to your point of what you're saying, about this guy saying, well, it's a de-evolution of capitalism. It really is. I mean, if you're talking about free market capitalism, we are starting to move further and further and further away from it as possible. Look, do I think that 100% free market capitalism with zero regulation is the best idea in the world? Maybe not. Maybe we need some regulation. I would say we need a very limited amount of regulation and a limited amount of government involvement. But we are going such the polar opposite direction. Jason, I can't make fucking 6 transactions between my saving account and my check account in a month. There's some stupid federal rule that prevents me. I got a letter a couple months ago. You're making too many movements between your savings and your checking account. I'm like, well, motherfucker, what's the point of having the 2 accounts? Okay, so this was some bureaucratic dumbass rule that somebody thought that they were doing somebody else a favor on, and this is the kind of nonsense Fed and the government is worried about. Meanwhile, we have a stock market that is completely unchecked to the upside, can go as high as people want. Like, when algorithms and illiquidity causes a 1,000-point run-up in the market, it's not a big deal. But when they contribute to a 1,000-point pullback in the Dow, then we need to investigate. And that is insane, and it's insane, and your listeners know it's insane.
Do you expect a lot more volatility going forward, or do you think that the intervention track that we've been on for a while...
You mean in this interview or just in the stock market?
I think like in a lot of different markets, we've had people like Mohammed El-Arian and others say that he could see 1,000-point swings daily going forward in the stock market. Do you think that's possible, or do you think that there's going to be?
We can't give all. Sorry, I'm just going back to my last point. We can't give all market participants a fucking participation trophy, okay? And that's what the Federal Reserve wants to do. They want everybody to be a winner. Me, you. Look, if we do the right thing and we invest in our 401k, we deserve our investment to appreciate. And they're trying to put a system in place where there's no counterparties and no accountability for making the wrong investment, okay? And everybody gets a trophy. Just we got inflation. Sure, if you take your $20 bill at home, it depreciates by 2% every year, and we plan on doing that. But just put it in the stock market, because stocks always go up, and that's the system that we've rigged. So they expect everybody to just pile into the market, unaware and unknowing, or perhaps blissfully ignorant, that this system that they have set up to kind of rig this one end-all, be-all entity where all of our capital is supposed to go is a flawed system, okay? Free market capitalism is not an area where everybody gets a fucked participation trophy. There's winners, there's losers. I've lost a lot of money on trade. I'm sure you have in the past too. I don't run to the federal government and say, hey, can you make me whole because I didn't do my research on this company, because I bought the wrong stock, or because I shorted the wrong stock. Free market capitalism, you have businesses that seed, you have businesses that die. The whole point, generate the most amount of productivity with the least amount of cost. I mean, we have a system that works. So to give you a long-winded answer, yes, I agree with what that, whatever the fuck his name is, said in that quotation. Sorry to beat a dead horse there for a second.
And they've also, before we talk about Jim Cramer, and I know you can, he's a Philly guy, but you don't like what he's been doing and saying, but I think in the last 10 years, Chris, that they have, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but they've created this passive investing bubble with index funds. So you just buy an index fund, and you're going to save money on fees, and you're going to outperform almost every single financial professional.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And also now, too, as I said on my podcast yesterday, people are, Josh Brown's out saying, I can't justify paying 2 and 20 to a hedge fund manager. It's like, yeah, because the stock market has contiguously gone up, passive funds have done well, and that is to some degree, a self-perpetuating cycle, too. As more money comes into ETFs, the ETFs need to be allocated, so that helps prop up the market. The market goes up, people think that the market only goes up, and they are more inclined to buy ETFs. And that circle keeps going around and around and around until you have a big bubble like the one that you're talking about right now. So active managers and the guys you have to pay 2 and 22 that are stock pickers that have to actually do the research will again come back in favor once we reach a point where it becomes more of a stock pickers market and less of a rising tide always lifting all boats regardless of what pile of shit company you have type market.
And so Jim Cramer has come out and challenged basically what these other hedge fund managers have said, and said there should be an SEC investigation into the stock market having a correction, which I just think is ridiculous, because the stock market's supposed to go up and down, and he has, I think, out of more than almost anyone else except for some of these mainstream financial media journalists, he has like probably the largest long-only bias.
Well, it's insane. The man has gone insane. Either that, or he's just pandering to a narrative that he knows his listeners like, which is, he runs this show for retail traders who are indoctrinated with a long bias, just as he is, just as his network is. So either he's trying to pander to his crowd there, or he has simply lost mind. Because at one point, Jim Cramer very clearly articulated that he knows how the game is played. Okay, if you think Jim Cramer doesn't understand exactly what goes on in capital markets, I think you're sorely mistaken. He's a Harvard-educated guy. He, famously had that interview on the street TV where he basically admitted to lying to journalists when he was short certain stocks, going into the options market and sweeping, big volumes of put off, trying to create a stir or trying to manipulate futures market. This guy he's got sharp elbows and he's a shark, and he knows what the fuck he's doing. Okay, so to come out on TV and say something as asinine as we should be investigating the Christmas Eve sell-off, which, by the way, again, as I said on my podcast yesterday, is a result of Treasury Secretary Numbnuts coming out and making a big do about nothing to begin with, okay? As I said on my podcast yesterday, Mnuchin wants to investigate it. All he's got to do is go look at a fucking mirror, okay? Because he played a large part in creating that panic. So I don't know if Cramer knows how asinine of an idea that is or not, but certainly I think it's ridiculous. I think it's horrible for his credibility. I think he's making a fool out of himself. And I think that our narrative, not just from a political standpoint, but just mostly focused on economics, the kind of libertarian economic theory, most of it, not all of it, I think is going to start to make some sense to some Main Street people at some point. And when that happens, I mean, look, CNBC's ratings are already going down the tubes. I just read a press release. They just lost out to Fox Business, I guess, for the last month for the second time in a row or some shit, whatever. But their ratings are not fantastic from what I understand. And a guy like Cramer, Jon Stewart should have held his feet to the fire way harder than he did back in like 2009 after crisis. This next crisis, when he gets the next big one wrong, you're going to be there. I'm going to be there. Other people are going to be there to make it clear exactly what this guy was advocating for and what he was saying leading up to it. Because as I often say on my podcast and on other ones, if the Main Street investor, the guy that lives next door to me in South Philly who's a welder or a plumber, if that person understood exactly what was going on, how the capital market worked, how Keynesian theory worked, what the Fed does, there would be riot. And that, my friends, why the entire industry is cloaked in these stupid names and jargon and nonsense that makes it difficult for the layperson to decipher. So that's that. If I wind up dead tomorrow, by the way, from a gunshot wound, you can start with this podcast and work your way back to the rest of the shit I've said for some clue as to why I probably turned up in a river somewhere.
So what you said about the average man on the street in Main Street, USA, they're getting killed with inflation and taxes. I would call it stagflation.
Yeah.
Real Main Street prices, whether it's for food, rent, healthcare, to education, tuition, those basic necessities. In the last 10, 15 years, there's been a massive increase in prices. There's a ton of anecdotal evidence. But, Chris, it seems that these things are coming to a head first in Europe, especially in France. The mainstream media here in the U.S. keeping a lot of this out of the news. Do you think, and I've listened to interviews from people protesting in France that, they can't pay their bills, taxes are being raised, they're being killed by inflation, and they can't start, there's not a lot of entrepreneurship there because of rules, regulations, red tape, taxes. So do you think the U.S. is maybe 2 or 3 election cycles behind what's happening in France?
Well, I don't really have a good enough graph on France to make an intelligent response to that. So in those types of cases, I like to just avoid trying to make a statement and half-assing it. What I will say is, Peter Schiff often reminds people that the definition of inflation is to inflate the money supply and not the fucking CPI number that prints. And by that definition, inflation has already run out of control in this country. And whether or not it shows up in certain asset class or it shows up in consumer prices remains to be seen. But at some point, look, Jason, you don't print the amount of money that we've printed, and you don't dilute the purchasing power of the dollar the way that we continually do it without having to pay the piper at some point. You can't, it is not exercise that you continue ad infinitum, okay? And here we see this first little inclination of us trying to do quantitative tightening to try and maybe start to unwind some of the stimulus that we've done. The first 6 months or year and a half of that quantitative tightening, all of a sudden we see, boom, shocks in the equity markets, and bang, the Fed is back on their narrative of we must do anything at all costs to protect the stock market, and it's going to lead to our ruin. It's going to lead to our demise, whether it's through sovereign debt or whether it's through the currency collapsing. But one of those two things I think will happen at some point and some degree. So I don't know about France because I don't know the situation, but I know that they run on a similar system of central bank that doesn't make any fucking sense to me. Maybe it's because I don't have a PhD from Yale, but I don't know.
Well, Chris, Europe has also had European socialism for many decades after World War II. It actually started before World War II, but it increased a lot more after that. So, but we're seeing here in the United States, the rise, the popularity of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders should have won the 2016 Democratic nomination. It was stolen from him. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's an enormous radical. She's made some really crazy statements about universal health care, the Green New Deal, taxing people who are billionaires or even making a couple $1 million a year, like 70%, to pay for, all these different social programs. Beto O'Rourke, who's backed by his wife, I think the billionaire heiress, he wants radical socialism. So do you think maybe the man on the street who doesn't understand Austrian school economics, isn't libertarian, but sees their bills going up, they're blaming capitalism and not like central banking and politicians?
I do think that's a problem, and I think that people like Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders help perpetuate that. So just as people can kind of be misunderstood in the other direction, I think that probably happens, right? People see rising prices, the rising cost of healthcare, and they attribute it to being a result of free market capitalism instead of a result of people inhibiting free market capital. Really, where the problems are coming from, right? It really comes from deeply rooted in our economic theory and the way that we look at monetary policy. So yes, I think that's a good point. That is a very cogent argument to make, and I think that people that turn to socialists to try and fix those problems are going to be sorely disappointed when they, look, this woman, Ocasio-Cortez, is clueless. Okay, she's clueless. She doesn't have any grasp on basic economics, all right? She wants free everything for everybody. And where's the money going to come from? And, who cares? We'll cut from defense spending, or we'll tax billionaires 90%. I mean, these ideas are just nonsense. We have to let the economy breathe. We have to have a sound currency. We need to allow the free market to breathe a little bit. We need to reduce regulation. You want to see prices come down? Okay, let's reduce some regulation in the healthcare industry. Prices will start to come down a little bit. But these people that think that the government needs to pretty soon, Jason, you're going to roll out of bed, and everything you do from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed that night will be government run. Your house will be government owned. You'll wake up, you'll open a soda, which will be made by a government, manufacturing soda company, and a government subsidized television company. You'll watch your TV on when you sit on your government subsidized couch, and pretty soon individual liberty, you look up and it's just like completely gone, right? And these ideas that more government is the answer are ridiculous. And I said this in my presentation in May. I mean, have you ever walked into a Department of Motor Vehicles? Have you ever walked into the the VA rather? Any of these government-run entities are a fine example. How about the post office, okay? My father worked for the post office 3 decades with a bunch of great people and good guys, but it wasn't the most efficiently run show in the world. Trust me, all right? And that's why the post office is gushing money and losing money, all right? So putting the government in charge, at the end of the day, it comes down to a decision of, do you want to let people choose for themselves, or do you want to let the government choose for them? Whether it's putting their kids in school, what kind of health care they want, what political ideology they should apply themselves to, what the tax rate should be. Should people have control, or should the government have control? It boils down to that kind of question. And these socialists think that the government needs to have control of everything in our lives. And it's just not true. We just don't need it. And then people say, oh, well, what about fucking whatever? What about the roads? You drive on the roads every day and your taxes pay for the roads. Yes, you're right, but that can be privatized, and it can be done at a municipal level, and it can be done at a state level. There are so many things like, oh, well, what about federal air traffic controllers? It's just the federal employees. Otherwise planes would be crashing in midair. It's like, you don't think private companies can win a bid to do that? And then you don't think the consumer, once they look at what airlines are using, which infrastructure will have the choice to, and I agree, some regulation is probably good in the airline industry, but you don't think if you loosened up the reins a little bit and allowed the consumer to pick, same goes for banks. What are banks doing with your money when you deposit it? Are they being risky with it, or are they being conservative with it? Allow the customer to choose. I want to go with this bank. It's got a higher interest rate. It's going to pay me, but I know that my capital is going to be used in a riskier fashion when I deposit. So you just can't have the government suffocate everything. And that is exactly what these guys are advocating for, and I just don't think that doesn't run commensurate with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if you ask me.
I agree, and I think, unfortunately, though, we're a small minority. So a lot of people are graduating universities, and they have enormous student loan debt. They can't pay their bills. They're not finding good jobs, and they're voting for socialism. So I think, unfortunately,
but a growing minority. I mean, would you agree that it's a growing minority?
Yes, it is growing, but so are the socialist graduates who are brainwashed at the university level. So I think there's less people in the middle, in my opinion, Chris, now, and I think the Democratic Party is even kicking out most of the moderates, and they're replacing them with the radicals. So I think, right. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think things are getting worse ideologically. There's less people willing to compromise and meet in the middle. There's more radicals, especially on the Democrats.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think you make a lot of sense.
And then we have, these rich most of these guys are either Wall Street or Hollywood people or Silicon Valley people. They've called themselves champagne socialists. I've seen them on dating apps call them that. But champagne socialists saying, we have to have universal basic income. We have to have all these different things paid for. But I don't think they're going to be the ones, Chris, who want to pay the taxes. They're going to have to have someone else pay.
Well, and who's going to do the work? Once everybody's guaranteed a job, what's going to be everybody's motivation to get up and go to work? Like, hey, I got a job now. It pays me a minimum wage, and I can't get fired. So, why the fuck should I get out of bed
Wall-E.
anymore?
Did you see that Disney Pixar movie, Wall-E, where it was all those fat people and the recliners and the robots?
No. I have no kids. I don't spend a lot of time watching Disney movies unless I'm really stoned,
We're going to get in trouble on that one. It's okay. Elon inhaled on TV, on Joe Rogan, so we're okay. Chris, from the China Hustle documentary, I know you've interviewed Carson Block, Muddy Waters Research. He was one of the first guys involved. He was supposed to be, as you talked about in the interview, the focal point of the documentary, but I think Dan David ended up being the focal point of the documentary. For listeners out there, it's only a couple dollars. Go spend the money, go watch it. You'll learn about how crazy the things were with the reverse China mergers and the shell companies, and how even really sophisticated professional hedge fund managers were defrauded as well.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It was directed by a guy named Jim Rothstein and was produced by Mark Cuban, I think, helped fund the project. And the movie basically follows Dan, and it follows several other people that were involved in exposing a number of companies listed in the United States that were based in China that turned out to be completely egregious fraud, and not like, hey, we're doing some revenue recognition wrong, like, hey, the fucking factory doesn't exist, like that kind of fraud. And, Dan and GeoInvesting sent teams to China to do the due diligence that the exchanges and the audit should have done on these companies, namely just show up at their door or talk to people that were locals and say, hey, is this factory open? Some of it was rigorous due diligence where they were counting the number of trucks going in and out, but the conclusion was generally the same on a lot of these companies, which is that they were not who they purported to be, and that a major fraud was being perpetrated on the American people. So the movie lays out exactly how all of that stuff was found out, and it is a fascinating movie. If you are interested in investing or you're interested in U.S.-China relations, this is worth watching because there's still a number of U.S.-listed China-based companies now out there. Some are probably legit and some probably aren't. So it's still, timely, and it's still topical. It's a fantastic movie. It's well worth the $2 or $3, whatever you would spend to rent.
And I thought it was also interesting to see, Chris, that the Chinese companies were actually being honest with their Chinese, government officials, sending the accurate information about their balance sheet, revenues, cash flow, those types of things to the Chinese government regulators. And meanwhile, some of these companies were overinflating by 10 times or more their financial information to American.
Well, and that was the coup de grace for a lot of these companies, was when, investigators, some, for GeoInvesting, some working for Carson Block and Muddy Waters, guys like Citron and Kerrisdale, had guys when they went and pulled the SAIC files, which is the China State Administration of Industry and Commerce, the numbers that they were reporting in terms of their revenue, a bunch of other financial metrics, did not gel with what they were filing with Securities and Exchange Commission. And when there's a gap between those things, that's where a lot of questions born. That is fertile ground for skepticism and question. And then when you start asking questions, you start pulling out a lot of strings. And when you start pulling out a lot of strings, next thing you know, you find out that people in the village say that the factory hasn't been opened in 2 years or whatever it is. So it's a fascinating watch. I would recommend anybody go and watch the movie. It's a great way to spend an hour and a half, especially if this kind of stuff interests you. And it's a documentary, so it holds your attention. It's very well done. Not a lot of filler. It's a lot of content.
So in the remaining part of the interview, Chris, I know you've interviewed a lot of big-name short sellers with really good track record short selling. So some of them have made a lot of money on their trades. Now, they've obviously lost money because short selling is very risky and dangerous, but I think they have a lot more winners than losers. Now, would you say from interviewing people like Marc Cohodes and Bill Fleckenstein, and also you're interviewing guests like Herbalife, that short selling has gotten a lot more difficult recently compared to maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago? Because it seems that the regulators, the SEC in the United States, isn't really interested in stepping in and totally basically destroying a company. The auditors aren't really...
Sometimes they do. I mean, the regulators have limited resource, right? So when you're the SEC up against a $7 billion company, you're probably outnumbered in terms of capital that you have access to and things like that. So I think the regulators, to some degree, are the best job that they can do with what they have. I think that the playing field in general for short sellers, and I said this on my podcast last night, is huge, right? The fact that Cramer is calling for an investigation of a one-day stock market sell-off tells you everything you need to know, right? It's not enough that we are running an economic theory and monetary policy that guarantees prices, stocks will go up. That's not enough, okay? It's not enough that we decoupled the dollar from gold so that we could, use it for political and governmental purposes, for really anything we want, and print as much as we want whenever we want. That's not enough for shorts, for those with the long bias. We haven't rigged the system enough, according to them. So now, even one-day sell-offs need to be investigated, because after the market's tripled and then it pulls back, 10% or 15%, that's like the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. So I think as we move further and further in that direction of rigging the system, it gets harder and harder for short sellers, because now you can go out and short companies with shit fundamentals like Tesla and nobody cares, because everybody's walking around like fucking zombies expecting stocks to just go up, regardless of whether or not the CEO is smoking joints on podcasts or whether or not he's fabricating buyout offers out of thin air. And, there's a lot of probably U.S.-listed China-based companies that have questionable things about them too, where people are just piling capital into them. They go, it's got a low price-to-earnings ratio, or it was at 10 before and it's at 2 now, so it needs to go back up, without even understanding why is it valued like this? How is it valued? How is the company funding itself? None of these critical questions get asked. So, yes, the stock market has turned basically into a zombie that just constantly stumbles its way upward, and that is a great detriment for short sellers.
I interviewed Francine McKenna over the summer. She's an accounting expert. Awesome. Yeah, she has decades of accounting experience, and I asked her if it was fair to criticize the SEC for not going after these companies more, and she agreed with me. She said that basically, and she's worked at the Big Four accounting firms, she said the Big Four accounting firms, for the most part now, are not even willing to issue, the going concern warning for a company, even if they're basically insolvent, that they only really want to do this, whether it's the accounting firms that are auditing or the regulators, they only want to do this after the company's basically already dead. So a lot of people it's basically buyer beware, caveat emptor. And, I think it's just a really sad situation now, because if you do the research like you and the other short sellers, you'd think that, all this, there's just tons of evidence with Tesla stuff. You can go on Twitter and look at it, tons of evidence of all the problems.
McKenna's brilliant, right? She knows her shit. I followed her. She's at Read the Auditors on Twitter. I followed her for years, and I love reading her stream. She writes some great stuff. She's written, I don't know if she still writes for Market Watch, but she's one of the few people that holds people's feet to the fire and takes people to task when she can. Anybody that sat through an audit at a public company knows exactly the level of due diligence that goes on. I mean, I worked for a company that underwent a public audit, okay? It was a small company at the time. I think it was like an $80 million market cap company at the time. They sent us 4 junior PwC, interns or whatever audit company it was, 4 kids that were 22 years old and probably some high schooler doing an internship. And that was the extent of what we got on our side. And basically it's the company providing the auditors with, hey, here's our numbers, here's our figures, here's what we do. And a lot of stuff the auditors have to take at face value from the company. So when people say they have audited financials and, the average everyday person thinks, wow, that this company has been rigorously vetted by the top executives at PwC, that's not what's going on during audit. It's just the opposite in respects.
So an audit is different than hiring forensic accountants. The forensic accountants then are the ones that are checking everything to look for fraud. So it's a difference.
It's different than what?
Different than hiring forensic accountants, people who are going in there looking for fraud and theft, felonies, basically.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I would, yes. I don't know exactly what you're asking, but yes. I mean, I guess, are you talking about when companies hire forensic accountants to consult for them when things are under question and they have to, the board has to go in and kind of vet something that may be in question and they hire those type of forensic accountants? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, or it's due diligence on a merger and acquisition, and then one of the companies doing the acquiring hires forensic accountants, and then the accountants look at all the books and they say, well, there's fraud going on in these divisions, or there's $30 million stolen and that we can't account for and stuff like that.
Very different. You're right. And I think all you would have to do is go back and look at some case studies of some mergers and acquisitions that fell through as a result of those things and find out what the dynamic was between the firm doing the due diligence maybe for the buyer versus what the auditor that signed off on the company's financials did.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I've probably done a lot of research listening to some of the short sellers. David Einhorn, I'm not sure if you've read his book. He wrote an entire book outlining so he wrote an entire book outlining, for listeners who are not familiar, outlining, a lot of people consider it dry, but I think it's interesting, outlining all the fraud at a specific company, detail for detail for detail. I think he handed the book to the SEC, and the SEC did nothing.
Yeah, I thought it was a good book, too. And I read that before I read his book before I read his book probably in 2012 or 2013, so certainly wasn't as informed as I am today. And I still found it interesting. I got through it quickly, and I don't like to read too much either. I'll listen to audiobooks, but sit down and turn the pages unless I'm flying somewhere or have a lot of spare time on my hands, which I usually don't. But I got through his book relatively quickly. And it's a fascinating read.
Well, I'm laughing because he basically gave the SEC a case and they didn't want to do anything with it. And another situation,
so did Marc Cohodes.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up next. Exactly. The funny thing is he actually gave the exact same evidence to Jim Cramer. He gave it to like dozens of mainstream financial media journalists. Jim Cramer, Ben Stein, I think the guy who was an actor who got his own like financial television show for all. He gave copies of all the documentation about the Madoff Ponzi scheme, and no one would listen. That's what the book
and just think about it. Einhorn pointed out the fraud at Allied, and Marc Cohodes pointed out that Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme, and nobody paid attention, and nobody did anything, and then both things collapsed, or at least I don't think Allied collapsed, but Madoff collapsed, and everybody was looking around at each other like, how could we all have missed that? And then what happens is people are on their toes for a little bit after that, kind of, and then we fall right back into where we are today, which is accepting everything at face value without asking any questions, buying the financial media's bullshit. And the guys, by the way, that point out that the system may be fucked, like you or like me or like people that are criticizing Tesla or criticizing, companies, these people are now the crazy lunatics again. Until one of us is right and a very big, on something that can't be ignored. And that will happen. And I don't think it'll be too much longer before one of these guys gets their validation. I don't know who, and I don't know on what company, whether it's Schiff or whether it's Einhorn or whether it's whatever. Something will collapse. Something will break. Again, it is just the nature. It's human nature. It is a guarantee of the system, the way that we run it. And it's like in Ray Dalio says in his video about explaining how credit works. He says something like, it's in human nature to just push it, And it's like, that's true. And it's true not just with the supply of credit, people over-leveraging themselves. It's true with people that are running fraud. You push and you push and you push till one day you wake up and the whole thing's fucked, and then you go to jail. Or if you run one of the big banks, you don't go to jail.
I think a lot of the problems, Chris, have emanated from not putting the bankers in jail like what happened in past financial crises prior to 2008. I think that's part of the main problem.
Well, I think a good point to make would be there's a lot of people out there that blame the financial crisis on the bank, and there is some blame, but it's who enables the banks to operate the way that they do without repercussion, and who guarantees the banks be solvent in a case where they need to be bailed out. So look at the man behind the curtain, right? Yes, did J.P. Morgan probably do some things that they shouldn't have done? Of course. Did Countrywide offer loans to people they shouldn't have? Of course. What would the attitude and the sentiment be, though, if the Fed and the government wasn't enabling that stuff? What would the attitude be at the big banks today if people had gone to jail in 2008? Because it would sure as shit be very, very different. We'd be looking at the financial sector very differently now than we do, currently. So I think you're right. It would create a culture of accountability, and it would send a message, but it's never going to happen. Because these guys, they'll go to each other's fucking dinner parties, Jace. You know what I mean? They go to each other's $10,000 a plate charity dinners. Well,
the other thing is
the bumper on my Honda.
Well, the other thing is that politicians from both political parties are kissing the ass of the bank. So the banks basically are in bed with all the major politicians from the Republicans and the Democrats. So that's why a lot of the things don't change, because you have these large corporations in certain industries. There's only a handful of them that run each major industry in whether it's Wall Street banks or the military-industrial complex, and nothing changes because they have control of the political process.
Yep, the banks run the world, man, and so does the military-industrial complex. You're 100% right.
Yeah, I saw, you didn't come down here to LibertyCon, but I saw Justin Amash do an interview on the opening night of LibertyCon, and everyone thinks he's the libertarian in the Republican Party because he can't get on the libertarian ballot, I think, in Michigan. But he basically said that Congress is broken. He said the Speaker of the House has so much power now that the individual House of Representative members can't put legislation through, and that the Speaker of the House, whether it's Republican or Democrat, blocks everything. So basically now you have Congress that is totally unfunctioning, that, Congress spends so much money, allocates so many resources, and they're not even willing to allocate, $5 billion or $7 billion or whatever on principle.
And at the end of the day, the Democrats and the Republicans get together and they go have lunch together, or they have a bottle of wine together. They all know each other. At the end of the day, look, there may be differences on paper. Okay, we're pro-gay marriage, we're anti-gay marriage, or okay, we're pro-higher taxes or we're anti-higher taxes. But they both fall under the umbrella of succumbing to allowing the Fed and these economists to really run the show at the end of the day. They both are for deficit spending, so they can
war. Both parties are for war now, right?
Exactly. So we don't really have conservatives and liberals anymore on the issues that I find important, which is why I consider myself a libertarian.
Yeah, I don't think the libertarian Libertarian Party will ever have any political power. It's such a disaster. But all I can do right now is just try to point out corruption on both sides from both political parties.
I think the Libertarian Party will get there. I think it's going to take time and some very difficult lessons that need to be learned.
I hope you're right.
But I think they'll get there.
I hope you're right, man. But Bill Weld, who was the vice presidential candidate for Gary Johnson, wasn't even a Libertarian. I could go down the list of all the problems with the Libertarian Party.
I would like to see a Libertarian get in on the Republican ticket. I would like to see a Rand Paul or, a Ron Paul.
Ron Paul should have won the nomination years ago. He got screwed over like Bernie Sanders. Hardly anyone talks about that anymore. He won a lot of those Iowa straw polls, and he was polling very high. He was polling very high, and Fox News and the other mainstream media totally blocked him from getting in each time. They made sure
that was 2012, right? Not 2008.
It might have been both, man. He was. I was going to CPAC and watching Ron Paul speak, and he was drawing the largest crowds and winning the straw polls. I think he was screwed, probably worse than Bernie Sanders was in some instances.
Oh, he was. I remember watching those debates. In 2008, I was on his political street team. I was living, I think, in Westchester at the time. So I remember, they sent me all the pamphlets and I was canvassing the neighborhood for him back in 2008. And there's just something about that guy. He, to me, seems like one of the last remaining American heroes. He says what he means what he says. He doesn't, he votes according to what he says. He doesn't vote different than what he stands for. He's a straight shooter. He's, been married for decades. He's, he's a physician. He's he's just an honorable man. And there was just something about him. The more I looked into him when I first discovered him, kept expecting to find something that was going to turn me off or to catch him in a lie. And it just never happened. He's just stood by what he said for so long and what he stands for, which is liberty. It's like, how can you not get behind that? And so I remember in 2012 or 2008 watching those debates when one of them was the year that Mike Gravel was running for the Democrats. Also, too, I was enjoying watching him. He's straight shooter would be an understatement. But yeah, they weren't giving him TV time. They weren't giving him questions. This was right around when the internet started to make an impact on elections. Like now it's deal. In 2008, it was still kind of a budding resource for running a political campaign. And I think that kind of sparked a movement and kind of furthered the libertarian cause in a very big way. And I don't know, I would love to see somebody with libertarian ideology sneak in on a Republican ticket. I just think it's a matter of time, man. Obviously it's not going to be this election or the next one or maybe the 5 or 10 after that, but I think it will happen.
I hope you're right, man, but I don't know if in political climate today with so many American citizens like not even having $500 in their checking account, people getting ravaged by inflation and taxes, people worried about like keeping their job, if someone telling the truth and not promising voters freebies can actually win an election right now. I'm not sure about that.
Oh, I think you're right. I think that's a good reason to be concerned. I don't think that they can. And I don't think that they will be able to probably, in 4 years. And the question is, what happens? What's kind of the catalyst that finally breaks that cycle? And I don't know what that's going to be.
Well, I hope I'm wrong about this, but it looks like the U.S. Is headed down that dark path. I'm seeing a lot of similarities from the 1920s and 1930s. So it looks like Europe is ahead of us in that regard, but I'm seeing a lot of the same similarities to what happened to people prior to, really bad socialism increasing and then protesting and violence in the streets, and then it escalated to like we have fascism now, I say, in the U.S., but, it's not the type of like 1920s or 1930s fascism yet.
Well, I'm not much of a history buff, certainly not as much you are, but I will certainly agree with you that I don't think that we're on necessarily the best path right now as a country. And, that's my feeling about things from a financial perspective, certainly. I don't know, man. It just feels like, I saw something on CNN the other day or one of the other networks that was like NASA plans on shooting down an asteroid for the first time in the year 2022. And I just thought to myself, just let it go. Just let it we'll take the asteroid, like I don't know how many more Gillette commercials I can watch. I don't know how much, how many more political lies I can listen to. I don't know how much more Jim Cramer I can take. Like, we'll take the asteroid at this point.
I was going to make a Space Force joke, but I was laughing after what you just said. Well, man, I've kept too much of your time for today. I want to thank you for your time. For our listeners out there who have not started listening to your podcast, you are a breath of fresh air in an ocean of pretty much boredom and repetition. So I think you're naturally Bullshit.
Don't forget bullshit.
I think you're naturally funny, man. Maybe it's from hearing all those crazy stories as a bartender.
It's Friday, so
Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Chris. And for listeners want to check out your podcast or follow you on Twitter or contribute to their Patreon after they've had a couple drinks after listening to this podcast, how do they do so?
That'd be awesome. Yeah, get drunk and send me money on Patreon. Everything else, don't even worry about it. It doesn't even matter if you agree with me. Just send me your money. No, my Twitter handle is QTR Research, so I'm on Twitter pretty much every day. My website is quotetheravenresearch.com, so you can check out my shit there. My podcast is called the Quote the Raven Podcast. Find it anywhere. Trust me, it's on YouTube and iTunes and all this other stuff. So just Google me, and that's it. I'll see you out when we're both having a whiskey in South Philadelphia somewhere.
I actually have not been up to Philadelphia except the airport once. But also mention, Chris, that you write articles on Seeking Alpha 2 for years, and you have a good article from, a couple months ago on overstock.com.
Oh, thank you. Did you like that? Certainly the trade hasn't moved in the right direction far, but I appreciate that.
Well, it's tied to crypto, and the funding deal didn't go through. It sounds like it was pulled, but it was with a Chinese company, so you don't know if you can really trust them, right? So.
And that's pretty much what I said, right? It's with GSR Capital, and they are a China-based company, so we'll have to see. But if they close on that money, then it'll be Katie bar the door. I think stock will double from where it is now, but I don't know. I've been wrong. Look, full disclosure, full disclaimer, I'm not an investment advisor, and I don't make recommendations. And I've been wrong about a lot. So, as I say on my own podcast, do your research elsewhere, all right? Don't listen to me. Make me your last resort for when you're drunk or you're living in a dumpster somewhere or you're really, really bored. Maybe you're on a long flight. Then maybe, okay, tune in. But other than that, consult your guy at Edward Jones wearing a bow tie because I don't want the liability.
Yeah, and you have an LLC, and we don't want any more suits with badges showing up at my door. I'm really tired of that. I think actually, I emailed over 30 different DC metro area lawyers, and none of them were interested. I think the lawyers here are so expensive and so spoiled that they don't even get out of bed for less than $10,000 now at this point. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yes, well, hopefully there's no litigation in your future or in mine.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, and have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Jason. Always appreciate me. Sorry. I've been drinking scotch since 8 o'clock in the morning. Always appreciate you having me on your show, which I also enjoy listening to, which is what I was trying to say there.
Please like this video, share it with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wall Street for Main Street YouTube channel if you have not already done so. Thanks for helping Wall Street for Main Street pass the 20,000 YouTube channel subscriber milestone despite YouTube censorship. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to 30,000 or even 40,000 YouTube channel subscribers quickly if YouTube doesn't shut down this channel. If YouTube does shut down this channel, remember to also sign up for the Wall Street for Main Street email list that's on the wallstreetformainstreet.com website and will tell you where the videos are going to be uploaded instead of YouTube. Also, if you really like the content and you decide that you want to give a one-time donation, you can go to wallstreetformainstreet.com. That's wallstreetformainst.com website where there's different options for you to do so. Or you can become a Patreon contributor. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to providing my loyal listeners with some of the best information, analysis, and financial education available out there, free or paid, as I work to grow the podcast and also get my educational technology company funded.